Hi there, my name is Dr. Mary Keilty. I'm a MacMillan clinical psychologist, and this is Chapter 2 of the Coping with Diagnosis workshop series. In this workshop, I'm going to be covering some common emotional reactions following your cancer diagnosis and what may be seen as sort of normal adjustment. I'm going to share the screen and tell a bit more about the session, and I hope you find it useful. So, as I said, my name's Mary Keilty. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work as part of the MacMillan Psychology Service within Bedfordshire Community Health Services. Along with my colleague, Dr. Lisa Dvorak's, we will be presenting various topics around coping with a cancer diagnosis. This webinar is intended for anyone affected by a cancer diagnosis, whether it's yourself who's been diagnosed with cancer or a loved one or a friend around you. We've developed a series of workshops that aim to help you acknowledge the emotional and psychological impact that it can have on you and those around you. And we'll also be providing some helpful ways to help you manage your emotions going forward. There are 6 chapters in this series, and we do encourage you to watch them in chronological order because each chapter builds upon the last one. However, we do understand that you may want to kind of revisit certain chapters or share chapters with particular people if you feel it would be relevant. Okay. I just want to acknowledge that we do invite you to pause the video and come back to it at any point, at any time, if you feel that's necessary. The content that we are going to be talking about is likely to ask you to connect with some difficult feelings, and it might be that you need to take a break. We also will have periods where we ask you to kind of pause the video, maybe reflect on what's been said, and so we do ask you to maybe grab a pen and paper just to be able to jot down your thoughts and feelings, or maybe a notepad in your smartphone if that's easiest. So maybe just pause the video and go and grab that now. Okay, so following on from chapter 1, hopefully you've watched the video where Walter first hears about his diagnosis on Breaking Bad, and one of the things at the end is his attention is sort of honed in, and he's noticed that coffee stain on his doctor's shirt, and that's his kind of initial response to being told about his cancer. And I don't know if that kind of rang true with you in terms of how you experienced your cancer diagnosis, but we do know that the threat and the shock of hearing you or a loved one has cancer directly impacts the way that we actually experience those moments and how we process the information. So if we kind of take a look at maybe the brain that we've got, and in terms of understanding why this might be, we've actually kind of got the brain that has a bit of the newer parts, which we call the neocortex, which is what is seen as the human brain. But we've got some older parts of our brain as well from our sort of ancestry. So we've got the limbic system, which is our mammalian part of the brain, which is really good at sort of managing and signalling and feeling our emotions, and then we've got in the real centre of our brain our reptilian brain, which is the oldest part of our brain, which is kind of key focus really is sort of survival and reproduction. And sometimes these different parts of the brain can sort of override one another. And what we know is that the human brain actually works less efficiently at the time of threat and shock. And what kind of kicks in is our reptilian brain. So we find that when there's high levels of arousal, our brain is kind of interested in just surviving. So our actual ability to think, our kind of memory systems, our attention, which would be coming from our kind of neocortex, our newer human parts of the brain, don't work as well. And actually, research tells us that when there's increasing levels of stress, our brains are actually hardwired to discount factual information, and they rely more heavily on our emotional experiences. So that's in the limbic system, somewhere called the amygdala. And they've coined this the amygdala hijack. It's almost where the amygdala part of the brain kind of hijacks the rest of the brain and overrides what's going on. So if there's high levels of distress, that actually kind of can kick in and prevent us from thinking logically in that moment, and we might find ourselves in the fight, flight or freeze mode of survival. We also know that stress and sort of frustration, anger and fear, they can also just overwhelm the brain, and they deprive it of oxygen in severe cases, and it kind of shuts down our ability to think clearly. And when this emotional flooding occurs, you literally cannot think straight. And some people describe that experience of being sitting in the doctor's room and hearing the news, they just weren't able to think straight. They wonder why they didn't ask the questions that they would ask now had they go back in time, or why did they say that? Why did they respond like that? And actually, you know, in high levels of threat and fear, it directly impacts on the way that we process that information, and we actually can't think clearly. So just to say a little bit more about the flight, fright and freeze response. The fight, flight and freeze reaction is our kind of survival mode. It's an inbuilt internal alarm system that can go off when our brain detects a threat. And we've almost got sort of three options: to fight that threat, to flight, so that means to kind of flee and run away, or sometimes just freeze. And sometimes you see this freeze reaction in kind of David Attenborough documentaries, where an animal will just completely freeze and almost hope it won't get noticed. And it is our inbuilt response to stress and to threat. And as I said, going back to the previous slide around the brain that we've got, you know, we are humans, and like our ancestors, you know, threat and survival were one of the key things. We're here because our ancestors survived, and therefore, although saber-toothed tigers and the fear of being eaten is no longer around for us, our brains have largely gone unchanged, so they will perceive that threat and go into this fight, flight or freeze mode in the same way when they recognise danger. Our stress hormones will start circulating to facilitate this mode. So cortisol, adrenaline, it gets the body ready for these three options. And we know that this can have a physical impact on us, and some of the feelings that you might get when feeling very stressed can actually be put down to anxiety and fight, flight or freeze, as opposed to something else. And I'm just going to say a little bit more about that. So when the threat system goes off, the blood gets taken away from sort of the skin and the outer layers and goes to those core muscles that are really needed in enabling us to run away or fight effectively. And that means our muscles might get tense, they may shake and tremble. Our heart beats faster to feed more blood to the muscles, and it enhances our ability to fight or run away. We might experience a change in our breathing, where it gets quicker and shallower. You're actually taking in more oxygen to be able to run away. And non-vital functions like the digestive system, they actually receive less blood, because in those moments kind of digesting your lunch is less important. And so people might experience sort of butterflies in the tummy, maybe the urge to go to the bathroom. And we also find that our thoughts can be racing. So again, that brain is just purposely trying to evaluate threat, and it's trying to do it very, very quickly so it can make rapid decisions. And what might then be difficult is actually very hard to focus on a conversation or anything for long periods of time, because actually the feeling of danger is overriding our ability to concentrate. We might have racing thoughts. And just lastly, with that breathing becoming quicker and shallower, we might get quite a dry mouth and feeling a little bit dizzy and lightheaded if we're over breathing. And all of these physical changes can actually be caused from the threat system. And sometimes it can be helpful to label, you know, butterflies in the tummy as my anxiety, rather than it triggering worries that, you know, could that be the cancer, or, you know, particularly if you're noticing patterns to this, that's actually caused from the threat system and levels of anxiety. It's completely normal, and just think of it as your body's way of its internal alarm system. It's kicking off. So worry and anxiety is understandable, given hearing about a cancer diagnosis, and people have lots of worries, understandably, ranging from what treatment will I get, when will treatment start, will it work, How am I going to tell people? What's going to happen at work? What's going to happen with the children? And actually, worry is a really useful problem-solving strategy. It's our way of anticipating and identifying if there's any problems, and then hopefully working out a way to solve them. And for some people that stays as a helpful response, but actually sometimes during stress we might notice that we're worrying so much that it no longer feels useful. So we may be worrying about too many different things at the same time, or we might be worrying about things that are not actually in our control, and we just can't stop doing it. And the problem with worrying about things that aren't in our control is that we can't actually problem solve them, and the worries just go round and round and round. And you might notice that then this kind of triggers your anxiety, because you're worrying about things, and that kind of kicks off your flight, fright or freeze reaction, and then that becomes activated, and then you're back in the cycle of your body kind of getting prepared with breathlessness, thoughts racing, butterflies in your tummy. So it's important to notice if your worry has started to become unhelpful, such that it's becoming too frequent and actually is not actually solving some of the problems. And we'll be coming later to some really helpful strategies to manage worry cycles. Another very understandable and common reaction to hearing a cancer diagnosis for yourself or for a loved one is feeling sadness, or maybe even depression. And this is a common response to cancer. And one of the ways we can think about this is around loss, because what actually possibly sits under sadness is the recognition that there's been a loss. And this might be a real loss, so there might be the treatment might be that actually a part of your body is going to be surgically removed or changed, so kind of a loss around the physical impacts to your body. It might be the loss of your role, so maybe temporarily not being able to go to work or not being able to do the things that you would do in this way. But also recognising that there may be a more invisible loss of what you had imagined life would be like at this point, or imagined the future for yourself and what you had hoped life had in store for you. And this is something that's called finite grief, and it's grieving for something that's actually imagined or that you had anticipated. So for example, imagining what you would have done in your retirement and what you'd hoped for, and maybe that might not be possible now, or might not be possible at this moment. And we know that people experiencing finite grief actually can experience grief in the same way as they would do for a loved one. So kind of the roller coaster of emotions, where your emotions kind of can feel very intense, and you might be feeling sad one moment, angry the next, and just then numb, and all of these different emotions might chop and change. And just recognising for you if that might be going on. And we know that some people express their feelings in different ways, and certainly with sadness and depression, you might find yourself actually just withdrawing from people a bit more, and being very tearful, becoming irritable, and it may affect your sleep, so maybe not being able to sleep as much, or sleeping too much maybe, and maybe affecting your eating habits as well. And it's important to notice that some emotional impact is understandable, but that isn't to say that you can't get some support for that, particularly if the sadness feels like it's become globalized, that you're feeling sad about lots of different things in life, and the intensity where it's affecting you in your day-to-day life and being able to participate in your normal activities. That may be when it may be more what we would call depression. A very common emotional reaction is feelings of anger, and particularly since there is nothing fair about cancer, anger can feel like a very justified emotion towards what's going on for yourself or for your loved ones. And I guess in sort of our society, anger is often sort of labelled as the bad emotion, or the unwanted emotion, and maybe we need to kind of recognise that actually that isn't the case. All these emotions are completely valid, and they make sense that you might be feeling angry with what's going on, and actually for some people, anger is actually part of the fight, flight or freeze reaction, since kind of under anger is fear for some people, and how they actually experience that fear can come out as anger, and noticing that isn't necessarily that's perfectly valid, I guess is what I'm saying. And the key to that is how we process and express the anger. So, whilst anger might be valid, it's not okay to kind of be aggressive and to lash out. It's how we can kind of express that in a way that's within the limits of what we would see as okay behaviour. So we've gone through some strong emotions, and it may be that you felt none of these, or it might be that you felt all of these during this period of hearing about the diagnosis. And one way to sort of kind of think about why we might be getting such strong emotions, not only about the loss, but about this reality gap. And it's something that Russ Harris talks about in his Reality Slap book, which is a really good self-help book. And how having a diagnosis of cancer can kind of come crashing down in your life and make make huge impacts. And you've got this gap between the life that you wanted and the life that you had potentially before this all happened, and very quickly you've now maybe got a different life for the moment, and how that leaves a big gap, and understandably how then sort of intense emotions can arise. And it's sort of just an invitation really to hold yourself kindly with all of that, and maybe you've not felt anger before, or maybe you've not been worried before and you've taken things in your stride, but actually acknowledging that this is different, you've not experienced this before, and there may be a really big reality gap for you where this isn't the life that you wanted, and it's understandable that you might be feeling some strong emotions. So just want to talk about denial. Denial and avoidance are words that you might have heard of, and the picture there of kind of burying our head in the sand. I just want to say, it is a very common feature of adjusting to difficult information and stressful situations. It's our brain's way of slowing down, absorbing this new information, and gradually over time we would hope that most people would start to make sense of the cancer, what it means for them or their loved one, and be able to talk about it, be able to kind of go to the appointments and engage in life. But initially, plenty of people prefer not to think about the cancer and find it difficult to talk about. And this may be yourself, or you might notice that a loved one or partner or friends are finding it difficult to talk about your cancer. And just to say that, it is our brain's way of filtering slowly that information, so we can kind of start to process it. And it just might be that people take different lengths of time to start to absorb that information. Okay. So this is our last slide, and just to acknowledge that, part of the task is what we call adjustment, and feeling these emotions of shock, anxiety, anger, depression, panic, grief, possibly loss of confidence, withdrawal, fear, worry, and maybe even just the numbness or denial, that may not be normal for you. You may never have felt these things before, but actually these feelings are very common with being diagnosed with cancer. And I just want to give you sort of another model of why these feelings might arise. So if we think about, we all kind of hold a mental map in our mind as to how we see the world, and we might acquire this just sort of through our experiences, through our upbringing, through the way that we sort of have led our lives. And our mental maps might be our beliefs and our assumptions about the world, about our life, and about other people. So, for example, you might hold a belief that if I am kind to other people, people will be kind to me. Or someone might hold the belief that if I work hard, good things will arise, I'll be rewarded. or if I take care of myself and I eat healthily, I will therefore have a healthy body. And we know that we might not tangibly be aware of the things that we carry around in our mental map, but they kind of guide us and affect how we anticipate the world. And something like a cancer diagnosis can really shatter some of those belief systems and really challenge them. And if we've been thinking that the world is quite fair, or if we eat well, we will then feel well and have a healthy body, having a cancer diagnosis can really sort of be at odds with some of the beliefs that we have. And part of adjustment is having to integrate the cancer into our belief system. How do we make sense of the fact that actually, we are a healthy person, but we also do have cancer? How can we adjust to the presence of this illness? And that's distressing, and it takes kind of mental energy to make that adjustment and make room for it. So these feelings are really common response to that stress that the system is under of being diagnosed with cancer and kind of making sense of it. And we might resist it. We might want to cling on to our beliefs that actually the world is fair, and if I do this, that happens. But actually, as that information starts to trickle down, then we start to reabsorb that, and our mental map has to sort of update itself. And in any sort of family system, one member might do that in one way and one member might do it in another way. So your adjustment is happening in the context of other people's adjustments, whether it's a partner, children, friends, neighbours who you're close to. And so if some person might be in one part of that process still maybe feeling quite shocked and numb, whereas you might have moved through that and be kind of in a different phase of your adjustment. And just to be aware that the clinical distress that we see for people and what is normal is very individual. So we will be coming on to other slides later on, particularly in chapter 6, around if you feel that this is not normal and you need extra support. That will be covered in chapter 6. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 2. If you want to see what's next, chapter 3 covers the impact of cancer on your relationships and family life.